Over the last 9 months, we've experienced isolation, loss, and uncertainty.
The intimate sentence that caused Catherine to cry was just revealed by Princess Anne. The most explosive aspect was not just what Camilla said, but also how long those remarks had been circulating behind Catherine's back, while the royal family continued to smile next to her in public. The comment Camilla never thought Catherine would hear was repeated by Anne in a closed parlor at Windsor Castle. William became motionless. Catherine's eyes filled, and her hand went to her mouth, but Anne wasn't done. She had made several remarks in that room, the most recent of which was so intimate that William would insist on knowing how long the palace had been concealing the facts. Camilla's treachery was not that she didn't like Catherine. Rather, it was that she had grinned at her while attempting to undermine her prospects. With no cameras, no announcement, and no warning, the meeting had started out as a quiet discussion about royal obligations. When Catherine arrived, she thought they were there to talk about appearances, duties, and the monarchy's image. Rather, Anne shut the folder in front of her, turned to face Catherine, and declared that there was something she could no longer conceal from her. The conflict that ensued was not typical family strife. According to Anne, Camilla had been doubting Catherine's fortitude in private. Not her timetable, not a challenging week, nor her fortitude. According to people with knowledge of the conversation, Camilla had said that Catherine was too weak to handle the responsibility of waiting next to William. Then, another phrase appeared. She said that the public's compassion had elevated Catherine above the organization. At first, Catherine remained silent. She had raised 3 children, carried public expectations, stood beneath the spotlight for years, and prepared for a future in which she would be at the head of the monarchy. However, neither a nasty headline nor a mob were the source of the words that shattered her calm. They originated within the family. William turned to face Anne and posed the crucial question. Had Camilla been saying these things for months, or had she only spoken them once out of rage? Anne responded right away. There was a pattern. The meeting's purpose was altered by that one response. Staff members had heard variations of the same message Anne clarified. Catherine was gaining too much power. It was necessary to control her popularity. The authority of the existing reign could not be overshadowed by her public involvement. While some comments may have been ignored, others could not. Anne then set down a series of briefing documents on the table. The worry had not stayed in the background of discussions. Rebalancing attention had come up in conversations concerning Catherine's public appearances. The amount of time spent speaking had decreased. Photo positions had been changed. Details of the engagement had been altered without justification. Because she thought the choices were sensible, Catherine had agreed to every modification. Each one now appeared to be a component of something bigger. Camilla attempted to respond. She claimed that worry for Catherine's well-being and stress had been perverted into animosity. Anne didn't speak out. She merely reminded everyone in the room that she had given Camilla a private warning to refrain from making insulting comments. They had disregarded that warning. Charles appeared astonished. He had heard worries about workload, but not the words Anne was using. William became more enraged. Someone had been influencing choices while concealing the worst remarks. If the king had only been given a softened version. The phrase that had upset the staff was then disclosed by Anne. Camilla had stated that Catherine would eventually have to be replaced. Catherine's gaze fell. Well-being was no longer the target of the insult. It had to do with authority control and the worry that the future queen was growing stronger than anyone had anticipated. Hello, viewers. Did Anne have the right to be honest with Catherine? Leave a yes or no comment below. And please don't stand by and watch as Catherine is reduced to tears. By liking this video, sharing it with another royal watcher, and subscribing to the channel, you can demonstrate your support for Catherine and respect for Anne's bravery in standing up for her. Camilla may have thought that these remarks would remain unseen, but each like, share, and subscribe demonstrates that the public will not overlook what was done to Catherine. However, Anne had one last thing to say. Diana was involved. It raised the question of whether Catherine's fame actually belonged to her, or if she was merely living in the public's recollection of a woman they had always adored. It had been difficult for one witness to repeat. Before taking it into the room, Anne had hesitated. Catherine was aware of its impending arrival now. William and his spouse grew closer. Camilla gazed at Anne. Charles remained silent. And Catherine realized that the cruelest part had not yet been said, even though she was already fighting tears. Anne turned to face her and was ready to say the same thing that would permanently alter every connection at that table. Tension in royal life had started months before the private meeting at Windsor. The palace was unable to create or manage the tension that accompanied Catherine's return to duty. People lined up to see her. Her name was called by families. Kids reached out to touch her. By sunset, every wave and smile was included in headlines. That was not the response she had requested. It happened as a result of the public witnessing her go through a trying time while keeping her children safe and leading a regular life. It seemed intimate to have her back, not dramatic, not staged, individual, and that distinction gave her something that was difficult for the palace administration to quantify. Have faith. Everyone seemed to enjoy the attention. Charles was glad of the warmth. William and Catherine continued to be close. Besides her, Camilla grinned for the cameras, but questions flowed through private rooms behind the pictures. Why did all of Catherine's appearances dominate the media? Why did the news coverage of Charles and Camilla's engagements decline? Why did a week's worth of announcements elicit more emotion than a single subdued gesture from Catherine? Nobody expressed jealousy out loud. They didn't have to. The initial modifications were negligible enough to be disregarded. At one reception, Catherine's speaking time was abruptly cut short. A scheduled spot next to Charles was shifted down the line at another event. The phrase, "senior member of the royal family," took the place of a reference to her as the future queen in a briefing memo. The language had been changed for consistency, her office was informed. Catherine agreed to it. This facilitated the continuation of the pattern. When an engagement itinerary arrived late, she didn't voice any complaints. A photo setup that put her away from William was accepted by her. She didn't inquire as to why the Wales household's approved details were being changed. She surmised that the palace was juggling public expectations, pressure, and maintaining a stable appearance. However, someone was observing. Princess Anne had been a part of the institution for decades. She was aware of the distinction between purposeful placement and disarray. When employees started being wary of Catherine, she saw it. When private secretaries ceased responding directly, she became aware of it. Above all, she saw the same phrase popping up in unexpected places. Public compassion. Anne first heard the words from an assistant next to a quiet lunch. The account was cautious. Camilla had voiced fear that the public balance inside the monarchy was becoming to be distorted by sympathy for Catherine. After listening, Anne inquired as to whether the remark had been made out of rage. No, the assistant replied. Calmly, it had been said. She remembered that response. A few days later, a different employee recounted a different discussion. The wording was sharper this time. The insider recalled that the public had begun to view Catherine as the emotional center of the royal family, which was making her popularity perilous. Once more, Anne inquired as to whether the comment was related to Catherine's workload or health. Once more, the response was no. It has to do with influence. Anne was still unwilling to respond promptly. She knew how words altered as they passed through the corridors of the palace. Before moving on to the next room, a statement could become softer, sharper, or meaningless. So she bided her time. She observed. She contrasted what she had heard with Catherine's surroundings. A third account then showed up. Instructions to rebalance attention were given According to a senior assistant involved in appearance preparation, Catherine shouldn't always be in the spotlight. She should keep her comments to a minimum. Charles defined his own reign, and references to the future should be kept to a minimum. Camilla was not mentioned in any of those directives. However, the wording was consistent with the private remarks. Anne stopped considering the situation as gossip at that point, because rumors vanish. Fingerprints were being left by this. She started to turn around. The shorter time spent speaking. The photos that were edited. The late schedule is altered. The wording that linked Catherine to the future was eliminated. Every choice might be defended on its own. When combined, they showed direction. Someone wasn't just responding to Catherine's appeal. It was being contained by someone. Catherine didn't know. She kept showing up ready, extending a cordial welcome to the staff, and standing next to Camilla with the same deference she had always exhibited in public. Later on, that picture would become the most agonizing aspect. While questions about her position and strength were being raised to which she was unable to respond, Catherine was publicly demonstrating her loyalty. Anne had to make a decision. The palace would write everything off as a misunderstanding if you spoke too soon. If you wait too long, personal grudges may become official policy. She then noticed the briefing document. A suggestion on Catherine's future ceremonial role was buried beneath words about continuity and balance. In order for the palace to reevaluate how much attention should be paid to the Wales household, it suggested lowering her appearance at some official events. There were just 4 words in the phrase at the bottom. Control the sympathies of the public. Anne read it twice. Abruptly, she realized the exact location of the private remarks. After reading the briefing paper, Anne remained motionless. Without attracting notice, she folded it, put it in a blue folder, and carried it off. When someone showed up with names and dates, the palace struggled, but it could withstand rumors. So she started softly. A senior household assistant was the first person she talked to. Anne posed a single query. Did the remarks on Catherine's popularity stem from worries about her influence or her health? The assistant paused. Then the response arrived. Impact. A second conversation took place during a private lunch with a staff member. That individual recalled Camilla's comment that Catherine was taking center stage in the public narrative of the monarchy, not because Catherine asked for attention, but rather because it was freely given. That love was hard to control, according to Camilla. Anne requested the precise phrasing. 3 phrases were repeated by the employee. Too brittle, too shielded by empathy. For someone whose future function had not yet materialized, it was too obvious. 3 sentences, 3 different cuts. Anne didn't write anything. Her recollection was precise, and it was hard to ignore the pattern. Catherine's health had turned into a pretext for talking about something else. Strength, position, timing. Anne wanted to be sure. The third individual had assisted in setting up the family gathering. This narrative linked personal statements to pragmatic choices. That employee claimed that there had been pressure to restrict Catherine's frequency of appearances next to Charles. Balance was cited as the explanation. Beneath it was a different concern. Every time Catherine stood close to the king, cameras moved in her direction. The headlines followed every time she spoke. Every time she grinned next to William, the future appeared to come before the current reign was prepared to let it go. The true worry was that Anne realized that Catherine's infirmity was not the issue. It was Catherine's power. Before involving William or Catherine, she made the decision to confront Camilla. After a planning meeting after everyone had left the room and no employees were still nearby to listen, she selected a private moment. She was not accused of jealousy by Anne. That would have put an end to the discussion. Rather, she inquired as to whether Camilla had said that Catherine was too delicate for a more significant job. Camilla responded that personal issues were being misrepresented. Anne inquired once again. Was that what she had said? In response, Camilla said that someone ought to consider the pressure Catherine was under, particularly at a time when public sentiment was surpassing customary royal responsibilities. She claimed that occasionally using challenging words was necessary to defend the monarchy. Anne's face remained unchanged. She told her that worry was one thing. It was another to talk about Catherine as if she were a problem that needed to be contained. Camilla retaliated. She claimed that Anne was letting institutional judgment get in the way of family loyalty. The public loved Catherine so much that it was impossible to rule her out. Authority did not come from popularity. Being sympathetic wasn't preparation. Emotion could not rule the monarchy. That response revealed everything to Anne. There was no miscommunication here. It was a conviction. Anne gave her a direct warning. It was not appropriate to use Catherine's health as evidence of weakness. It was forbidden to use Diana's memory as a weapon. The Wales household's decisions were not to be influenced by remarks that Catherine was unable to respond to. The space became motionless. Camilla then claimed that Anne was too protective. Anne didn't say anything further before leaving. Hello, folks, was Anne correct to stand up for Catherine, or should she have remained mute to preserve palace harmony? If you think that Camilla would have benefited only from silence, then Anne was correct. If the palace needed to see Anne defend Catherine, please like, share, and subscribe to this video right away. The whispers used against her should be drowned out by the support. Nothing was altered. There was no apology sent to Catherine's office. There was no correction to the briefing. There was no withdrawal of instruction. The palace continued, as if the warning had never been issued. Then Anne heard another comment. After the altercation, a staff member overheard a portion of a conversation. Apparently, Camilla had stated that Catherine's role would still need to be regulated before William's responsibilities grew, and that Anne was getting too engaged. The alert had been ineffective. Even worse, there was only one last sentence. The person who was saying it paused, turned to face the door, and asked Anne whether she really wanted to hear the rest. Yes, Anne replied. Diana was mentioned in the sentence. It implied that Catherine did not have complete control over her public authority, that a memory she had not made was helping her, that the love that surrounded her was borrowed, fleeting, and probably going to end once the palace made the necessary adjustments. Even before she heard the last words, Anne understood the significance. Catherine was merely using Diana's shadow. The line was that. Anne was aware that it could not be kept a secret. Private intervention had not worked. Silence had not worked. Not even a clear warning had worked. No matter how unpleasant it was, Catherine deserved the truth. Anne made one last choice as a result. She would go into the Windsor meeting, close the folder, wait for the formal business to be concluded, and then repeat everything to Catherine. Not to shatter her, to ensure that no one could keep secretly breaking her. Papers and formal language were used to start the conference. Forthcoming events, messaging in public, the nature of royal duty in the coming months. Each topic sounded unremarkable. It gave the tone shift a harsh effect. At the table, Catherine took a seat next to William. The chair in the middle was taken by Charles. A folder was open in front of Camilla. Anne didn't say much. She observed. She paid attention. She bided her time till the secretary had completed going over the schedule. After that, the door shut behind him. In front of her was the blue folder that Anne was carrying. Anne interrupted Charles as he was about to go on to the next item. Catherine needed to hear something. It was a calm sentence. It had no effect. Catherine turned to face her. William instantly leant back. Camilla remained motionless. Anne started with the version that was the safest. Concerns had been voiced regarding the attention being drawn to Catherine. Never once. Repeatedly. The worry was that moments intended to represent the current reign were starting to be dominated by Catherine's presence. Catherine gave a soft response. She had never requested extra care. Anne claimed to be aware. Then she went farther. Attention was not the only issue. It had to do with influence. Some had wondered if Catherine's increasing prominence was coming too soon. It had been suggested that she should be less visible until the palace could take back control of the story. William's expression shifted. Who had suggested those things, he asked. After opening the folder, Anne took out one sheet. The meaning was clear despite the careful wording. Rebalance your focus. Restrict positioning in the future. Examine the ceremonial prominence of the Wales household. Catherine did not touch the page as she read the phrases. She had assumed the late adjustments were logistical for months. A seat was moved. A condensed speech. Hours before departure, an appearance was rescheduled. They had all seemed too little to take on. She could no longer deny the pattern in which those moments were now sitting together. Camilla was the first to speak. Planning documents she claimed were being viewed as personal assaults. Every royal household talked about public balance timing and visibility. One person's popularity could not overpower the institution surrounding them, according to the monarchy. William inquired as to whether those choices had taken Catherine's health into consideration. Any responsible planner would take pressure recovery and public expectations into account, Camilla retorted. Catherine turned to face her. Had her role been diminished because of this? No role had been diminished, according to Camilla. To keep her safe, changes had been made. Anne shut the folder. The word that had been used wasn't protection. The space became more constricted. Anne was asked to be specific by Charles. He had heard worries about the workload, but nothing that would imply animosity against Catherine. He wanted to know how far private language had gone. He got the answer from Anne. It had been said that Catherine was too delicate. Nobody said anything. Because it had been buried by weeks of administrative jargon, the statement landed with a bang. Catherine's face remained composed. Not quite yet. However, the warmth vanished from her face. William wanted to know when it was spoken. It had come up in multiple conversations, Anne retorted. Camilla protested. She claimed that the words had been taken out of their correct context. A situation, not a person, could be described as fragile. It would have been reckless for Catherine to act otherwise, because she had been under a great deal of stress. Anne didn't quarrel over terminology. The next line was delivered by her. Camilla had claimed that the public's sympathy was elevating Catherine above the organization. Charles turned to face Camilla. That was not schedule-related language. It was rivalry-related language. Catherine did not move, but her fingers clenched under the table. William's tone softened. Had official choices been influenced by those comments, Charles stated that he had given his approval for changes based on balance and workload. He was unaware that anyone was casting doubt on Catherine's value or arguing against her future due to her ailment. William was not calmed by that distinction. It exacerbated the problem. Before the information reached the king, it had been filtered. Someone had disguised personal animosity as administrative. There had been no campaign, according to Camilla. Only challenging discussions about a monarchy under duress, she claimed, were brought about by Catherine's popularity and responsibility necessitated boundaries. Anne posed a single query. Who set those boundaries? Camilla remained silent. The quiet spoke for her. At last, Catherine looked down. One tear was shed, followed by another. One insult was no longer the source of the pain. It was the realization that everyday events had taken on a different significance. Every inexplicable shift, every cautious grin, each time she had questioned if she had erred. William moved his chair back a little. Anne held up a hand. There was more. She disclosed that Camilla had discussed not just the present, but also the future. Catherine would have to be replaced once the monarchy took a different turn. The room echoed with the sentence. Catherine's eyes become very full. Camilla was asked to explain by Charles. According to Camilla, the statement was about constitutional order rather than humiliation. In response, Anne said that phrase was not necessary for any constitutional discussion. Anne then turned to face Catherine. Not yet had the deadliest words been said. Diana was involved, and nobody attempted to stop her this time. The last sentence was not hurried by Anne. She waited until everyone at the table realized that there would be no more grumbling about public attention rank or schedules. This was a private matter. Older. Deeper. It touched a section of Catherine's existence that had followed her ever since she walked next to William. Diana. Slowly, Catherine raised her gaze. William took a step closer, just enough to clarify one point without interrupting. The next words would not be faced by her alone. Anne's words were exactly as she had heard them. Catherine was merely using Diana's shadow, according to Camilla. Nobody responded for a moment. Then Catherine's expression shifted. Before she could stop them, the tears started. The strength she had maintained through each previous revelation suddenly gave way as her hand moved towards her mouth. It has nothing to do with Diana's name being brought up. For years, Catherine had endured that analogy. The reason for this was that the statement made all acts of public kindness seem phony. Each and every cheer, each headline, everyone who thought she had hope. Camilla said that none of it really belonged to Catherine. It was borrowed, momentary, unearned. William gazed at the person across the table. His rage no longer appeared abrupt. It appeared to be settled, under control. Its calmness is dangerous. When had the words been spoken, he asked, without taking her eyes from Catherine. Anne responded, following the caution. Nobody anticipated that part. It wasn't until Anne approached Camilla in private that she made the comment. She had succeeded after being made fully aware that Diana's memory, Catherine's health, and her future were not to be used against her. The boundary had been deliberately crossed. Charles asked Camilla if she denied it as he turned to face her. Camilla did not respond directly. Private conversations are being repeated without context, she claimed. She contended that the phrase had alluded to public opinion. The palace could not pretend that Catherine's popularity was unaffected by the frequent comparisons to Diana. Anne responded quickly. The phrase, "put her back in her place," was not included in public perception. Once more, the room became silent. According to Camilla, the monarchy could not be led by feelings. No one could safely ignore the expectations raised by Catherine's genuine popularity. The current reign would be undermined if the public started viewing her as the focal point of the establishment before to William's coronation. It was there. Don't worry. Fear. Catherine put her hand down. When she did speak, her voice was steady despite the tears still on her face. How many people had heard the comments? She inquired. Anne informed her that the pattern was evident because enough people had heard different accounts. The more difficult question was posed by Catherine. How long had everyone been aware of it? William pivoted to face her. There was more hurt than rage in that query. Camilla was no longer being questioned by Catherine. She wanted to know how many people had stood next to her, grinned at her, accepted her generosity, and remained silent as the whispering went on. Charles attempted to respond. He claimed not to have understood the entire language. He had been informed that there were issues with timing pressure and household balance. Nothing more. Catherine turned to face Anne. Nobody was protected by Anne. Some employees, she claimed, had been reluctant to speak. Others thought the issue would be resolved. Some believed that remaining silent was preferable to getting embroiled in a dispute between two royal households. For whom is it safer? The room was filled with the question. William repositioned his chair. He desired for Catherine to leave. Steer clear of the table. Steer clear of the explanations. Steer clear of Camilla. But he was stopped by Catherine, not in a loud voice, using just one hand. She wiped her face, took a deep breath, and turned to face Camilla. The room stopped observing Catherine as the injured person for the first time that afternoon. It was observing her as the woman who would eventually stand next to the monarch. She said that people could have approached her directly if they had health concerns. William may have been consulted with workload inquiries. The Wales household could have made decisions pertaining to her responsibilities. This was something that could not go on. Disguised as protection is private judgment. Official language conceals personal animosity. Catherine's own work was erased by Diana's memory. No one was attempting to eliminate her, Camilla retorted. One quiet sentence was Catherine's response. So why had she become smaller? With every change, nobody knew the solution. Anne stayed seated when Charles called the meeting to a close. She needed to put one last piece of information on the table. Catherine's ceremonial position was still mentioned in the briefing note. It was still in the planning system awaiting approval. William turned to face Charles. Catherine turned to face Camilla. Anne then accessed the blue folder again. The conflict had ended, but the choice had not. After taking the document out of the blue folder, Anne put it in front of Charles. It was not another ambiguous note about balance or a draft of a speech. Catherine's name had been moved from the customary place for the woman who would stand next to the future king in a proposed ceremonial order for an impending state event. Charles read the page twice. The modification was both big enough to convey a message and small enough to blend in with protocol. Catherine would still go. She would continue to grin. Photographs would still include her. However, the placement would subtly inform everyone in the palace that her future role could be changed at any time if another office felt threatened. William inquired as to who had given the go-ahead. Nobody responded. Planning documents, according to Camilla, went through multiple hands and shouldn't be regarded as evidence of individual intent. The document contained language already used in private conversations. Anne retorted. The same tongue, the same issue, the same attempt to subdue Catherine without ever facing her head-on. Silently, Charles shut the folder. The plan would not be carried out. He mandated that the Wales household be consulted for any future decisions pertaining to Catherine's responsibilities, ceremonial role, public appearances, and speaking role. No personal editing, no instruction in silence. William and Catherine must be informed of any last-minute changes. It was a boundary rather than an apology. Catherine sat there, gathering herself. Her calmness had not disappeared, but neither had the tears. She turned to face Charles and explained that anything other than allowing the affected person to participate in the conversation could be considered control. Camilla made another attempt to clarify that discipline was necessary for the monarchy. Catherine refrained from arguing. She merely stated that honesty should be the first step towards discipline. The defense was over with that phrase. William was standing next to her. Catherine got up with him this time. Catherine turned around as Anne watched them make their way to the entrance. She avoided looking at Camilla. She gave Anne a look. A dramatic embrace did not occur, just a slight nod. Thank you. Suffering. Comprehension. William and Catherine then walked out of the room together. Anne stayed behind, even though the meeting was supposed to end there. Charles questioned whether it had really been necessary to reveal every comment. Private warnings had already been sent and disregarded, Anne replied. Appearances had been shielded by silence, but Catherine had not been. Then she said the statement that Charles was unable to ignore. The palace owed Catherine honesty in private if it wanted her allegiance in public. Charles turned to face the closed door. He could no longer act as though this was a scheduling dispute, regardless of his pre-meeting beliefs. A boundary had been broken, and the person who was supposed to maintain unity had to face the reality that there wasn't much unity behind the pictures. The atmosphere shifted after that day. Nothing seemed broken to the public. At the same event, Catherine and Camilla could still stand. William was still able to walk next to Charles. Anne was still able to go into a room without revealing what had transpired. the monarchy would carry on doing what it had always done best. It would carry out stability. However, trust had changed behind the performance. William stopped accepting Camilla's office's inexplicable alterations. Catherine no longer believed that every modification was safe. Softened briefings could conceal personal intentions, as Charles now realized, and Camilla realized something she had previously been unaware of. Anne was open to talking. More important than any disagreement in the room was that knowing. Anne hadn't spoken up. She hadn't made any threats to cause a commotion. She had collected the words, followed their path, and presented them to the individuals they impacted. There was no more silence. Camilla's doubts about Catherine's popularity did not cause her the greatest pain. It was that while she continued to show respect, personal animosity had made its way through formal channels. However, the same encounter that brought her to tears also offered her something she had never had before: lucidity. She now understood the source of the opposition. She was aware of which choices needed to be questioned. She was aware that Anne would not stand by and let whispers become standard procedure. She was also aware that William had heard everything. Hello, viewers. Don't go without demonstrating your appreciation for Princess Anne if she gained it by standing with Catherine when others remained silent. Please subscribe, like, and share this video with other royal viewers. While being shoved aside, Catherine was supposed to smile, but anyone who stands by her can make it clear that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Because there is more to this story. The handwritten note next to Catherine's name, the state banquet seating arrangement that put her 3 spots away from William, and the royal figure who gave the order to change the arrangement before guests arrived, will all be shown in the next video. Everything is altered by that particular element.